Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans, and on today's show I have joining me Dr. Mark Hitchcock, who is a regular contributor to endtimes.com. He has written over 30 books on the end times, and he is the senior pastor of Faith Bible Church in Edmond, Oklahoma. On today's show, we're talking about current events in the news concerning the ongoing war in Israel, with a special focus today on Iran. You're going to want to hear what we have to say. Some very important things are happening regarding Israel and Iran. In the subscriber portion, Mark and I will also be answering questions such as, will Christians see the rebuilding of the temple before we're raptured? Will Christians go through the tribulation, as some Bible teachers claim? One person wrote in a question saying that a very respected Bible teacher was teaching that we're going to go through the tribulation. Mark and I will be talking about that. Another question, will we be married to our current spouses, or our spouses have already died and gone to heaven? And another question, if Satan is cast out of heaven in Revelation 12, is he still there right now? And how is he spreading evil if he's in heaven? So those are some of the questions that we're going to be answering. I am so glad that you've joined us today. And I also want to welcome right now Dr. Mark Hitchcock. Mark, thank you for joining me.
Well, great to be with you again, as always.
Well, we're going to talk about what's happening in the news related to Israel. We're especially going to be talking about Iran. Let me just mention to everyone, we wrote this book that came out right after October 7th called What's Next? The Israel-Gaza War. And so this talks about what happened related to Israel before the war, during the war, and now after the war prophetically, the significance of it. And really and truly, you know, what we're seeing in the world right now today, Mark, this is prophecy on steroids. It's just everything is, the labor pains are intense, and Bible prophecy is just happening right before our very eyes.
Yeah, there's, people years ago have always said, people always said, Jesus is coming back, and, they'll say, people have been saying this forever, but it's the unbelievable convergence of so many things that are happening before our eyes that, yes, we wake up every day and are surprised we're still here, the way the world is headed. So, yeah, it's what's happening in our world today. We're going to talk about a lot of that today, and I'll do some more of it on my show as well. But you really, it's not like you're looking for things to talk about. It's you're having to sift through the things and see what's the most important thing to talk about. There's so many things to talk about.
Yeah, on so many different levels. So we both look for articles when we do these shows together. I'm going to start out with this article. The UN Security Council adopts call for Gaza ceasefire, hostage release as U.S. abstains. And this is the Times of Israel. I'll read just a little bit of this. The United Nations Security Council passed a resolution on Monday demanding an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages after the United States withheld its veto and abstained from the vote. It was the first time that the Security Council passed a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza since the start of the war in October. Resolution 2728 is understood to be non-binding and is not expected to have an immediate impact on the ongoing fighting in Gaza, as has been the case with previous Security Council resolutions that have been adopted in other conflicts that were subsequently ignored. Now, the United States was trying to pass a resolution that bound Hamas to these talks that are happening in Qatar and also in Egypt, and also connecting the ceasefire resolution with the return of the hostages. And so China and Russia vetoed that resolution a week ago. Now the Security Council of the United Nations has passed a resolution calling for the immediate ceasefire and the release of the hostages, but it's non-binding. And the ceasefire is not conditioned on the release of the hostages. So it's really kind of a wimpy resolution, and they can't enforce this. And so what's going to happen is Israel's going to keep going to war with Hamas, and Hamas is not going to let the prisoners go. And so it really doesn't mean a lot. But one of the things that you notice, and we're talking about Iran a lot in this show, they have censured Israel more than all other nations of the world combined in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. And this is another example. Iran is literally getting away with murder, and the United Nations has nothing to do with it. And we're going to read another article here in just a minute, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that we've done for Iran. The United States has done for Iran in this past month. But the United Nations, the end of this age, and I want to make sure you agree with this because I think this is pretty obvious, that at the end of this age, the United Nations is going to muster forces against Israel. And it's not going to be a non-binding resolution. It's going to be a binding, unanimous resolution to come and take Jerusalem away from the Jews. Do you agree with that?
Sure. Yeah. And it's all the nations are going to come against Israel. You know, the book of Zechariah tells us that, you know, the campaign of Armageddon is when it's going to take place. So
this is the first, this is another indication from the United Nations of how much they despise Israel. And the Guterres, who is the Secretary General of the United Nations, he's continually come out rebuking Israel and protecting Hamas and saying that this didn't happen in a vacuum and things like that. So go ahead. You have another article there you want to read.
Well, just one thing I wanted to mention, this resolution didn't condemn Hamas.
Right.
But I think the major takeaway in this is just this symbolic gesture of the United States abstaining from this vote. It's the first time this kind of thing has happened. And so it's a further evidence of the slippage and the rupture that's happening between the U.S. and Israel, which is going to place us on very, very, very dangerous footing. So I think, sure, it's non-binding. Israel's going to go ahead and go forward with all this, but the symbolism of this, of the U.S. abstaining from it, I think is very, very significant, very sobering. Yeah. But I've got a couple of articles here about Iran also, kind of the same things like you're mentioning there. There's an article in the Jerusalem Post, or in the Times of Israel, says Shin Bet says it foiled Iranian plot to smuggle advanced weapons to West Bank terrorists. And they have a picture there of just all these weapons laid out there. It says the Shin Bet security agency, which is in Israel, Monday said it had foiled attempts by Iran to smuggle large amounts of advanced weapons to terrorist operatives in the West Bank to be used in attacks on Israeli targets. And it goes on and lists all these, weapons that were, fragmentation bombs, anti-tank landmines, grenade launchers, just all kinds of weapons. And so, Iran obviously is behind what's happening with Hamas. They're trying to get these weapons into the West Bank. They're behind what's called the axis of resistance, all these militia groups in Lebanon, Syria. They're behind what's happening with the Houthis, with Hezbollah, all of this that's taking place. So it's just a constant, coordinated effort by Iran to get weapons then into the West Bank. They can't get anything into Gaza now. And, the Israelis are able to stop this one, but how many more times have they gotten things in there that's not been able to be foiled? And so another article too related to Iran, let's mention real quickly, is in the Jerusalem Post. Iran is now kind of has out on the market a new unmanned aerial vehicle, a drone. It's a turbojet that can carry 13 bombs. And it has a distance of thousands of kilometers, which could reach Israel. But it shows where their sentiments are. They've called this new drone the Gaza drone. And so Iran today is basically a Middle Eastern arms dealer. And they're marketing these weapons that they have now. They're marketing their military arsenal. And Russia, of course, is one of the main customers as well, which takes us again back to the whole Ezekiel 38, 39 scenario. But it's just more and more things happening with Iran. And I think, to me, what this shows is one of these days, Israel's going to have to deal with Iran. They're going to have to cut off the head of the snake. And that's going to be really the ultimate precursor, I think, to what the Bible predicts in Ezekiel 38.
Well, that goes perfectly with my next article, because that's exactly, this is from the Jewish News Syndicate, and it says, Hamas attack, weapon of mass distraction as Iran nuke program advances. And this is from Karen Smilk. But listen to what this says, Mark. And this is from one of the top Jewish leaders. Israel needs to be prepared for the possibility of conducting high-intensity strikes on Hezbollah in Lebanon and on Iran's nuclear program simultaneously, a former senior Israeli defense official told JNS in recent days. Brigadier General Professor Jacob Nagel, former acting national security advisor to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and ex-head of Israel's National Security Council, is currently a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a professor at the Technion Israel Institute of Technology in Haifa. Nagel raised the possibility of a multi-staged Iranian strategy to go nuclear involving regional proxies, keeping Israel and the world distracted with conflicts. And he says Iran may have activated a weapon of mass distraction in order to make progress on building weapons of mass destruction, its nuclear program, said Nagel. The possibility of a long-term Iranian plan with a secret timetable in multiple stages must be taken seriously. And he says in the future possible third stage, Hezbollah becomes involved in a full-scale war, and a potential fourth stage, Iran taking advantage of the distraction, races ahead with this nuclear program. And so what he's saying is this is a top guy in Israel, and he's saying Israel has to be prepared right now to deal with Hezbollah, because this has already started, and to strike Iran's nuclear capabilities at the same time, because what he's saying is an advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu and the head of this defense agency. He's saying that Iran is using Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and all of this as a distraction to the world while they make weapons of mass destruction. Now, the International Atomic Energy Agency about 10 years ago was put in charge of making sure that Iran never got weapons of mass destruction, okay? Never got nuclear weapons. They came out about 2 months ago, the IAEA did. Iran has defied them. They've defied the entire world. They took the cameras out of their nuclear sites. They wouldn't let the inspectors in. And about 2 months ago, the International Atomic Agency Commission agency said that they don't know what's happening with Iran's nuclear program. They have no idea. And so right now, they're already at 60% enriched uranium. And what he is saying in this article, later in this article, is it takes very little time to get from 60 to 90%. And so Iran has masterfully surrounded Israel, the Houthis, the Palestinians in the West Bank, the Islamic Jihad in Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas. They have surrounded them with all these enemies that are attacking them on a daily basis while they're sitting over here developing nuclear weapons. And this is an existential threat to Israel that they simply can't ignore. In my book, Tipping Point, 2 years ago, I said Israel will strike Iran at some point if somebody else doesn't, because Iran is not going to stop their ambitions for nuclear power, and Israel cannot afford to let them do that. But think of the situation that Israel's in right now, and how much worse it gets if they bomb Iran.
No, that's right. You said we don't really know what the International Atomic Energy Agency. They don't know what's going on over there. Well, I think we all know what's going on over there.
Yeah.
Iran is very shrewd. This kind of distraction, but also they distract and build. But also, for many, many years, they used a different strategy: talk and build. Right. They were just constantly talking, drawing out these negotiations. So all the time that all the talking's happening, they're building. And now the time all this distraction is happening, they're building. So they're doing everything they can to put up a kind of a smoke screen, camouflage, while they're doing what they want to do. But they're suffering no consequences for it.
No.
They have some economic sanctions that have been put on them, but those have been lessened. And so they're selling things to Russia. They're involved with China. So they're not feeling the pinch of this. And so Israel ultimately is going to have to hit them where they'll feel the consequences of this. But when that happens, it's going to, who knows what dominoes then will begin to fall at that point in time. It'll be all bets will be off at that point.
Exactly. Well, later in the article, it says on March 15th, Washington reissued a $10 billion Iran sanctions waiver that allows Iran to access revenue from its electricity sales to Iraq. And so the Biden administration has released billions and billions of dollars to Iran that they wouldn't have gotten through the sanctions. And now, in spite of everything that they're doing, they're the ones responsible for October 7th. They're the ones responsible for everything that's happening right now. No consequences whatsoever. $10 billion. On March 4th, this article says, Reuters, quoting unnamed diplomats, said a quarterly meeting of the IAEA's main policy-making body saw Western powers again choosing not to seriously confront Iran over its failure to cooperate with the agency on a range of issues. And so the IAEA is basically just turning a blind eye and just saying there's nothing we can do about it. And then it says Nagel assessed that the United States and Europe will never attack Iran's nuclear program, adding that the sanctions relief being offered to Iran aligns well with Tehran's intention to continue with creeping nuclear progress. Hence, Israel must be ready for anything, for being able to strike the enrichment part of the program, but also for being able to strike the weapons system part of it. So he's saying in this article here, we're giving them billions of dollars. The IAEA is completely worthless. And see, the United States, and President Trump said this, President Biden has said it too, under no circumstances will we ever allow Iran to become a nuclear power. Well, the only way you can keep them from doing that now is physically going in there and making sure it doesn't happen. Well, they're not going to do that. That's what he's saying in this article. They're not going to do that. So because of that, Israel has to be prepared. So Jeremiah 49 is a prophecy of the destruction, the utter destruction of Elam. Elam is southern Iran. And Elam is where they have their launchers and a lot of their nuclear reactors and nuclear facilities are in southern Iran. And so if Israel struck Iran to stop them, that's basically where they would strike in fulfillment of Jeremiah 49. If that's what happens, it's going to happen. It's never happened before in world history. But I have wondered, Mark, and this is a wondering, but I have wondered in Ezekiel 38 where it says, I'm going to put a hook in your jaw and drag you down to the mountains of Israel. See, Russia has continually warned Israel and the United States of what would happen if they attacked Iran. And basically they're saying, of course, they're getting a lot of weapons from Iran right now. And so they're very, very closely knit. So I wonder if the hook in the jaw, if Israel bombed Iran, if that would be either the hook in the jaw or part of what would happen to cause Ezekiel 38 and 39.
No, I agree with that. I think, I've heard people say that before. I think General Boykin years ago kind of made that same comment that, that could be these hooks in the jaws with Russia. Because, Russia's, they're violating all these international sanctions, getting oil from Iran, getting weapons from Iran. They're helping Iran as well, sending them advanced aircraft. So, they're totally, joined together. And Russia, wouldn't want to come in probably and invade Iran or invade Israel on their own. But you're right. I mean, if they're that tied in with Iran, that could easily be the catalyst for them to do that. And so, the Russia and Iran together, they're mentioned there in Ezekiel 38, 2,600 years ago. What a proof of the truth of the Bible. You have these two nations mentioned right next to each other 2,500 years ago, and here they are today. But I think it's likely that will be what will somehow precipitate this. But Iran hates Israel with a passion. They're their greatest enemy. But if Israel hits Iran, we can only imagine how that will accelerate that hatred. And they'll want payback. And that will be, I think, what will happen when Ezekiel 38, 39 takes place. It'll be a payback for what's taken place.
Well, in 2022, I believe it was in 2022, Israel had a massive military exercise called Chariots of Fire. And they practiced bombing Iran, and they put 5 billion shekels in their budget for bombing Iran and then protecting their borders, because they know that all heaven's going to break loose when they do that. And so this is something that they have been looking at for a long time, but it's in the news. And top military officials, top diplomats from Israel are saying we have to be ready now to do this because the IAEA isn't going to do it. The United States and Europe, they're not going to do it. And they're sitting over here using this as a weapon of mass distraction while they're sitting over here doing this. And by the way, North Korea became nuclear with the entire world watching them, telling them not to do it. And so the world is pretty wimpy. When it comes to staring down someone, they get pretty wimpy about it. Israel is not wimpy. They have to fight for their very survival. One strike now, Iran has a hypersonic missile, by the way, with basically Israel's name on it, a hypersonic missile that can reach Israel in 400 seconds. That's 6.66 minutes. So if they had a nuclear payload and they fired that hypersonic missile, I mean, it's just, if it strikes, this tiny little nation of Israel, I mean, it's game, set, and match right there. So this is serious.
No, yeah, Israel's going to have to do something. And the United States, we've said over and over again, we're not going to let Iran get nuclear weapons. You're right. I mean, we sat by and let North Korea do it because the consequences of us hitting Iran, what that would set off in the Middle East, I think that they know they've taken all their calculations. They believe that we won't do anything ultimately. That's what I think they believe. And so I think they've factored that into their calculus. I think they do believe Israel will do something, but Israel will be much less of a power for them to deal with than the United States will be. Now, if Israel does that and Iran begins to come against Israel, that may drag us into it. That could be a hooks and jaws that drags the United States into this as well. But the United States, we're not going to do anything. I'm sad to say that as an American, but I really don't think. Certainly the current administration, maybe if there's a change, maybe it would be a legitimate threat, but I don't even think then that it will either.
So, Mark, the current events that are happening right now in Israel are, the pressure cooker is there. It's not going to go away. It's just going to get worse. Do you agree with that?
Sure. Yeah, it's ratcheting up right now. It's unlike anything we've ever seen. I mean, it's just, basically these nations have encircled them. It's like a noose that's tightening around Israel. Yeah. And ultimately all of it comes from Iran. And they're going to have to act and hit Iran, and as we've said, that's going to set off a Middle East firestorm unlike we've never seen before.
That's right. Well, we wrote the book, What's Next? The Israel-Gaza War. Anyone's interested in that, talking about what's happening right now and the prophetic implications of that. This is in a series called What's Next. We have another book you and I are writing together right now that'll be out in a month or two, and it's on the Antichrist. And because one of the things I believe that's about to happen, see, everything gets worse until it gets a lot better when the Antichrist shows up. The Psalm 83, what's going on right now, could be a fulfillment of Psalm 83, Jeremiah 49, Ezekiel 38 and 39. You have wars going on whenever they occur, but things are going to get worse. But there's going to be an answer man that steps onto the scene. I believe he's alive. I believe he's an adult. I believe he's on the world stage right now. That's my opinion. And I believe this is the type of a scenario because the Antichrist is the savior of the world at the moment that he steps up and brokers this deal with Israel. And he confirms a covenant with them, Daniel chapter 9, and they then enter into this 3.5-year period of peace that they haven't had before. The world then, celebrates this genius, this diplomatic genius that steps onto the world scene. Do you believe that what's being set up right now ultimately will come to fulfillment with the Antichrist?
Sure. We've had those Abraham Accords, and that's been set aside right now, but that looked like kind of a precursor to this. But with the situation that's over there, the whole world is focused on this. The UN's passing these various resolutions. People are looking for someone. We have been really since 1948 to come and bring some kind of lasting peace to that part of the world. And that's one of the key signs of the end times, I think, is just the constant turmoil in Israel and this clamoring and yearning for peace. And the event that starts the 7-year tribulation, the rapture doesn't start the tribulation period. A lot of people are kind of mistaken about that. I think the rapture begins. No, the rapture takes place sometime after the rapture. The Antichrist is able to broker this peace agreement between Israel and these nations that they've been at war with for, now for 70 years. And, he's going to be, the man with a plan, the Nobel Peace Prize winner. I mean, he's going to, be the Time Person of the Year. I mean, he's going to have it all. And that's what's going to catapult him ultimately to power. Now, ultimately, he'll double cross Israel, but everything's headed towards that. And we can see it's just reaching this crisis point where someone is going to have to come along and solve that problem. Now, it'll be a temporary peace. It'll be a false peace, but it will be a peace for some period of time. And the whole world will follow after the Antichrist. That's kind of the initial event that really catapults him to power in the world there at the beginning of the tribulation.
Yeah, and in our series, What's Next, of books, we're talking about the Antichrist, then we're talking about the rapture because, again, the things that are happening right now are all Bible prophecy being fulfilled. The world turning against Israel, wars and rumors of wars, all these things like that. But ultimately, the big prophetic events, there's going to be a rapture and there's going to be an Antichrist. We're writing about that. Mark, you have another article there?
Yes, this one's fascinating to me. This was on CBS News. Now, just think about this. It says, what these red cows from Texas have to do with war and peace in the Middle East. And it's an article about, of course, these 5, they're Texas red Angus that were taken over to Israel, these red heifers. And what the article's saying is, time's beginning to kind of run out because these heifers have to be a certain age when they're sacrificed. And we have to have these red heifers. It goes back to Numbers chapter 19, this purification ceremony there of these red heifers that would be burned, and their ashes were used in purification ceremony. But you have to have those for the rebuilding of the third Jewish temple. They're there in Israel now, these red heifers. But this is something that I didn't know until just this week. It says in this article from CBS, it says, when Hamas spokesman Abu Abida began a speech marking the 100th day of the war in Gaza, one confounding yet eye-opening proclamation escaped the headlines, listing the motives for the Palestinian militant group's October 7th massacre in Israel. He accused Jews of bringing red cows to the Holy Land. So one of the things that precipitated this was bringing these red heifers to Israel, because the Hamas knows the significance of that points to a third temple, of course. And one of the, that they called this in this massacre in October 7th, the Al-Aqsa wave, or the Al-Aqsa flood. And of course, the Al-Aqsa mosque stands there on the Temple Mount, as does the Dome of the Rock. And Hamas, one of their emblems, one of their main emblems, features the Dome of the Rock behind two crossed swords. And so the Jewish people, at least those who were there who are desiring to build this third temple, have these red heifers there. And some believe that they may be sacrificed this year at Passover. They have to do it in a place where they can see the Temple Mount. So it'd be there on the Mount of Olives. A piece of land has been purchased there. Passover this year is April 22nd. So it could be that sometime between now and then, or around the time of Passover, that one or more of these red heifers will be sacrificed. So there's only been 9 red heifers in Israel's history. This would be the 10th. But to me, that's fascinating that among these motivations for this October 7th massacre is Israel brought red cows into the land of Israel. They know what that signifies. And they hate that. They know that the Jews want to ultimately build a temple there, that is going to mean, that their third holy site, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, would have to be removed and have to be destroyed. So it's just another thing that we see happening in our world today that points just towards the chaos and ultimately the land of Israel. But then the bullseye in Israel is Jerusalem, and the bullseye in Jerusalem is that 36-acre Temple Mount area. That's the real powder keg, if you will. And so, we'll be watching this for folks and letting them know, if something happens over there with sacrificing these red heifers. But that would be a very, very significant event when that takes place, I believe.
Well, Mark, that's absolutely fascinating. And I can just say, next week on the show, we have an entire show on the red heifers. Mondo Gonzalez has written a book on it, and he confirms now, this will be part of the show next week, they have 3 kosher red heifers. Last November, they came of age to be examined by the priest. And they have 3 perfect red heifers. They only have to have 1. And they are, what you just said is true, they're looking for some time from Passover to Pentecost, sometime in that range. It would be the 10th red heifer, according to Maimonides. It would usher in the era of the Messiah. And so, and again, Mark, it's not just that that's happening, it's that everything is happening. You just see there's such a convergence, as you said earlier, there's such a convergence of everything. But if they actually, there's only been 9 since Moses, and this would be the 10th, and it would give them the ability to ceremonially cleanse the Temple Mount and the priest. They have everything ready. You've been over there, you've seen everything, I have too. They have everything ready, but the deal with the Antichrist is going to give them, obviously, the ability to build the third temple. But it just, to me, it just marks how close we are.
Yeah, the fact that Hamas, that's part of their motivation. They brought the red cows into Israel. That's what Hamas saying that. So, wow, that's that was powerful when I saw that. I mean, wow, it's just Hamas themselves. They realize the significance of this for their future, for their mosque.
Yeah, the sadness, and Mondo and I talk about this next week. The sadness of the red heifers is they're a fulfillment of Jesus. In Numbers 19, the red heifer is just a type of Jesus, that was slaughtered for our sins outside the camp. And the book of Hebrews talks about that. And so the sadness is they didn't recognize Jesus as the Messiah. The exciting thing is they will all be saved in one day, according to Zechariah 13. and that is going to happen sometime soon. But it is a huge issue related to Bible prophecy. Do you have any other articles there?
No, that's all I've got. I mean, just, like another article, there's one in Newsweek we've talked about already. Just Iran is kind of opening up four fronts. Basically, we've talked about that already, but that's part of their issue, kind of this you mentioned the distract and build, but they just keep opening up new fronts. The Houthis have been firing missiles into Eilat, which is the southernmost city there in Israel, right on the Red Sea. So it's, they're not far from there. So it's just, a constant stranglehold here. But that's an interesting article in Newsweek, a four-front war now that they've opened up. You've been worried about two fronts. Now it's four fronts.
All of you who are joining us on YouTube, hope that you have enjoyed this. We're going to go to the subscriber portion of the program right now, and we're going to be answering some questions. Mark, thank you so much for being with me today. That is great information, great insight. And I want to say, you're watching on YouTube right now, and if you're not a subscriber to endtimes.com, I hope you're a subscriber to Tipping Point on YouTube. If you aren't, just hit the button right now and subscribe. You'll get all of our information that comes out on YouTube. But we have my podcast, the one that you're watching a part of it right now. You can get the entire podcast without commercials for $7 a month. Also, Dr. Mark Hitchcock, who you just saw there, he also has a podcast that comes out every Thursday called Marking the Times. And so we have several podcasts a week. We answer questions every Friday. I have a devotional that comes out every Sunday called A Good Word. It's worth a lot more than $7, but for $7 a month, you can get everything that we have. It'll be a blessing and encouragement to you. So if you're not a subscriber, go to endtimes.com right now and subscribe. I'm glad that you've joined me today. We'll see you next time. Welcome to the Tipping Point Show. I'm Jimmy Evans. It's an honor to have joining me on the show today, Mondo Gonzalez. Mondo co-hosts the excellent program Prophecy Watchers alongside Gary Stearman, which I'm sure many of you have seen. Mondo is also the author of an intriguing new book, The Red Heifer Ritual, the last piece of the third temple puzzle. We've been hearing for the past couple of years a lot about the red heifers in Israel and their importance in rebuilding the third temple. And today we get to hear from an expert about what is going on. Mondo, thanks for joining me today.
Great to be here.
Well, I love your show. You and Gary Stearman do such a great job on Prophecy Watchers, and you guys have many guests on your show. Mm-hmm. This book that you've written is called The Red Heifer Ritual, the last piece of the third temple puzzle. Now, this is something that a lot of people are talking about because of the red heifers. And one of the Hamas spokesmen, I think it was 100 days after October 7th, came out with a statement talking about one of the reasons for the Al-Aqsa, raid, or the October 7th, was the red cows. And he specifically mentioned those. So this actually started, it was a biblical, part of what God told children of Israel to do related to ritual cleansing. Okay, so talk about why you wrote the book, kind of where all this comes from.
Yeah, well, it kind of became big news for, I guess I would say, the average Christian, because in September 15th of 2022, you have 5 cows showing up with big fanfare. I mean, the press is there in Tel Aviv, at the airport, even the Israeli government's there in some capacity. And so when that happened, I've been watching prophecy for 30 years, so I've been watching about the different red heifers and candidates, and they come and then they fade out because they become disqualified. But I thought, man, they have 5 now. And that's what led me to the idea of, you know what, I need to write a book about this, because to help the average Christian understand the background, not just in the Bible, because it is in the Bible, but also the prophetic trend, what's been going on, the history. And so I was able actually to come down here to Fort Worth and meet with one of the guys who was the ground zero. He was there, he saw the calves being born. So I was able to spend some time, interview him, and get the background for those 5 calves. But also, it's as you mentioned, it's very complicated, because you have rabbis that are quoting the Talmud and the Mishnah and these other Jewish writings. And so I thought, you know what, my undergrad's in Jewish studies. So I thought, hey, I understand all the different language. So I think the average Christian would appreciate having the entire kind of backstory, and again, prophetically, what we're looking for.
And so during this interview, where we're going to end is talking about what's happening now, okay, related to the red heifers, because you have direct information on what's going on over there right now. And so we're taping this interview in March of 2024. in April or soon there could be some developments happening over there. But let's go back to just the Bible, Numbers. I think Numbers 19 talks about the red heifer ritual. So what's the red heifer and why is it important?
Yeah, right. We don't think as Christians, we think in terms of, even as a pastor, if you believe in Jesus, your sins can be forgiven. So we think in terms of forgiveness of sins, not in terms of ritual purity, because we don't have a temple. We're not going, and we don't need that idea. But for the Jewish person, going back to Moses, God says, there is forgiveness, but also if you come to the temple to do your offering, you can become ritually unclean. You can, be with somebody who's dead or other things. And so what God did in His grace, He instead of having a sacrifice to become ritually clean, He gave the red heifer, which in Numbers 19, I want you to slaughter this cow, take the blood, and then I want you to burn the entire cow outside of the camp and mix the ashes with water, which then can produce, there's a lot of volume, so to speak. Right. And then you go to the priest or whatever, and he can sprinkle you, and you become ritually pure through a ceremony, which allows you then to approach the temple to give your offering. Very inexpensive way for the people. Again, God was gracious. So that was one of the original things that God wanted. He wanted people to see Him, and so to come to the temple and to meet Him there. And He gave this inexpensive way to become ritually pure and approach the temple.
And so that is the red heifer is symbolic of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Okay, to talk about that. Talk about the symbol.
Oh yeah, clearly what we see is in the book of Hebrews, which is the greatest book that's written to Jewish people, right? And their understanding. In the book of Hebrews, twice he makes mention there about the red heifer ashes being used to purify the externals. And he says, if that's true, then how much more will Jesus' blood be able to purify the conscience?
Right.
And so when we look at all the Old Testament regulations and prescriptions, we know, Colossians chapter 2, verse 16, that they all point to Jesus, that they were just a shadow, but Jesus, the Messiah, is the substance. And so the writer of the Hebrews is pointing to us and saying, even the red heifer, which is interesting, it's one of these very rare, one offering in all the 613 commandments, but pointing to Jesus.
So one of the things that interested me, I was thinking about it one time about when the red heifers were being flown over to Israel, and I kept thinking, what's significant about it? But the other thing is they slaughtered it. This was not a polite sacrifice where they carved it up and separated everything. They took it outside the camp and they slaughtered it out there. So there's a push right now to rebuild the third temple. So what's the big deal about that? Why is that important?
Well, what we know as prophecy teachers is that, Daniel, Jesus in Matthew 24, John in Revelation 11, and Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2 all describe that at least at the midpoint of the tribulation period, there's going to be a temple in existence. There's going to be sacrifices being offered, which again will be taken away. So we have 4 different witnesses that say this snapshot, there'll be a temple. And so we know that. But then what's interesting is prophecy teachers for decades, even before really the temple movement, even before Israel really was a nation, you had those that took the scripture literally that said, well, the Jews are going to be back and there's going to be a temple there. And you could see the commentaries, which was kind of fun to see. But because we know that, now people watch and say, well, what's the third temple movement? And then you see, of course, with 1948 with Israel, 1967 with Jerusalem. Immediately, the Temple Mount Faithful was a group that was organized by Gershon Solomon right at 67. Right. So he started it, it's been around, and it was like, we have the Temple Mount. Let's rebuild the temple. And of course, we know, even at Passover and other festivals throughout the last 2,000 years, what do they say? Next year in Jerusalem. Right. Next year in Jerusalem. Right. So this has been on the radar in the Jewish mind since 70 AD, but now to see that movement come to play is very powerful. And then the prerequisite, that's why I said the red heifer ritual is the final piece because of the third temple puzzle. They have everything else done. You can go to the Temple Institute, you can see all the things that they've done there. So what are they waiting for? Well, there's 2 things. They're waiting for the political government to allow it, and the geopolitics to allow it. But the second thing is they've been waiting for the red heifer because they've been trying this for at least 35 years, looking for it, because they need the ashes to purify the people and to purify the area. Now, I'll say this. The temple could be built, but if the geopolitics were there, it could be built now. They just couldn't use it until the red heifer is done, which allows it to be purified.
So in the Temple Institute, and we've both been there, We went on a tour of it, I believe it was November of 2022. And when you walk in and you begin the tour, they say these are not replicas. Mm-hmm. These are kosher, and all of these will be used in the third temple. They have all the garments, all of the instruments for sacrifice, and all things like that. The altars. They have the menorah standing in the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem. They have the cornerstone ready. I believe that's the Temple Mount Faithful. They have the cornerstone. At the end of the tour, because a lot of people talk about the Ark of the Covenant, at the end of the tour, they have an exact replica of the Ark of the Covenant. And it's the only replica in there. And they say matter-of-factly, they also say this on their website, they say this is a replica of the Ark of the Covenant. We know where the real one is. And when the time comes, we'll go get it. Because a lot of people say, well, the Ark of the Covenant's gone. Not according to them.
Yep.
And they have eyewitnesses. Have you heard that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this is significant. So for a prophecy-minded Christian, why does this make a difference? The red heifers on stuff.
I think that two things. If you compare like you just mentioned, all of the things that they've done in the Temple Institute, and you go, wow. The Bible says this. It says at the middle of the tribulation, it'll be there. Well, they have all the preparations done. And then the last thing that's been hanging out there for a long time has been the red heifer. And now we can talk about how many are qualified in that. But now you at least started with 5 candidates. And I think the average person would have to say, we're getting close. We're getting close. It's one thing to see, I've been going to Jerusalem for 20 years. And it's one thing to see the Temple Institute and that. And that's good. But when the last piece is there, and there's 5, there at least originally was 5 candidates, I think that the average Christian says, I need, again, Jesus is coming soon. We know that all these signs point to it. And of course, it requires us to be ready and also to be, occupying until he comes. So to me, it's an impetus to stay busy in the kingdom work, to seek the Lord, to be ready at all times, and to be excited we know that Jesus is returning not only at the rapture, but also to fix the world.
That's right. So are there things happening right now in Jerusalem? They have the 5 red heifers. Now, it's my understanding that one of them has been found not kosher. Is that correct? Yeah.
I just got the update a couple weeks ago from Byron Stenson, who works at he's the organizer of Moneh Israel. Right. So he said there's a lot of misinformation out there. Even at the Temple Institute Facebook page, you see, I don't know who's moderating it, but he said very clearly, and he's in the know. He's the one that brought him over. So he said one is 100% disqualified. He said there's 4 left that are fully qualified. He said, but one of them is just not as red as the other 3. So I imagine if they were to pick one, they wouldn't pick that one. They would pick one of the other 3. So right now, that's the latest information on the qualifications of the red heifers.
So 3 are kosher. Mm-hmm. Okay. And is there a plan to go? When can they? Because I think they have to be like 2 years and 1 day old or something like that.
They have to be, this is another thing too, that there's a lot of misinformation out there. They have to be 2 years and 1 month old. 1 month. And when you look at the Temple Institute page, which they have a lot of stuff on the red heifer, it's been there a long time on their internet page, but they say 3 years, 3 years, 3 years, even a book by Rabbi Richmond, which I have, which he wrote back in the 90s, 3 years. But what they mean by that is different than what we mean. Sure. When they say 3 years, they mean in the 3rd year. So for us, if my grandson if I say he's 3, that means he's 36 months plus something. Right. But for them, that just means that he's 24 months plus whatever, because then he's in his 3rd year. And that's really the idea. Well, we also know that, and I've confirmed this from Byron and Robert Mawiri, who's down here in Fort Worth, who was there, that their birthday was October 5th through the 12th of 2021. So basically, October of 2023, they became 2 years. So if you go to November 15th, 2 years and 1 month. So they've actually been, this is the interesting thing, and I'm not a sensationalist, but for the first time in 1900 years, as of November 15th of last year, we have at least 3, possibly 4 red heifers that are fully qualified and of age. Wow. First time in 1900 years.
Is there a plan that you know of to sacrifice, to slaughter them in the near future?
So the plan starting about 6 months ago, even earlier, last summer, they were waiting for them to become qualified in November. And so I was thinking, they could really do something in November. But what they talked about was waiting until Passover, which is Passover 2024, which is April 22nd of this year. And they said, well, this was the Temple Institute and the B'nai Israel group. They said, well, the plan is to do the ceremony on the Mount of Olives. They have the property.
Yes.
And
it has to be done on the Mount of Olives.
It has to be done on the Mount of Olives. The Mishnah, which is the oral tradition written down 280, says very clearly that. And they have the property there. There's actually two properties that are potentials. But they said between Passover and Shavuot, which happens to be June 12th. Now, they chose that window just because they wanted to coincide it with some Jewish festivals, because during the Jewish festivals, there's more interest and there's excitement. And I remember asking Byron in an interview I did with him, does it need to be on there? He said, no, it doesn't need to be. That's just, we wanted to bring it up. Well, at the time, this was prior to October 7th. And even later, as we heard about with Hamas, I was always skeptical, honestly, that they would do it that way. Byron had told me that he said, "Hey, pray for me. I'm working on trying to get live stream for 800 million people."
Oh gosh!
But that was
I would be watching.
Yeah, but that was before Hamas came out and said what they said.
Right.
So what he did tell me was that the Israeli government prior to that was very pro-ceremony. They were going to help with the security on the Mount Olives because, as you know, on that east side, Silwan is right there to the south. It's a Palestinian area, and so to have this big bonfire of a cow would draw a lot of attention. So they talked about having security. Where now he told me, Mondo, that the Israeli government is now very much against having this ceremony at this time.
Oh wow!
So that has been a big change because of these latest things. They're in the middle of a war, and I understand that because I think in terms of my thought was always that it would be to go out and do that for security reasons would be very challenging. But they would do it privately. They'd film it. They'd record it and say, "Hey, by the way, everybody, 2 weeks ago we burnt the red heifer and we have the ashes, and here's the video." I think that would be a little bit more security conscious, but. Nevertheless, things are changing and really fast right now.
Do you think that the Hamas was truly disturbed by the red heifers, or were they just using that as a pretext for what they did?
We know that you can't believe anything they say.
Right.
And so I think absolutely a pretext. It was something that was convenient for them because they have a base, right? They have a base too, and they want to get the people inflamed. But even lately, I don't know if you saw the video, but CBS did a report on the red heifers in the last 2 weeks.
Really?
And they interviewed one of the rabbis of that's part of the Temple Institute that was here in Texas, Yitzhak Momo, on the site of where the location of their property is. But it was a hit piece on the Temple Institute inflaming the regions, basically blaming them for October 7th. And he got really irritated in the conversation. But one of the other things that they did, and I have to say this, is because what they did is, the video is like 5 minutes, people can find it online, but about 2 minutes into the video, they show this huge altar. And the guy says, this is the altar that they have prepared in order to slaughter the red heifer. And this thing is gigantic. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, there's no way that altar would fit on that property. So I did a little research, talked to some people in Israel, come to find out that altar was built 20 years ago, south of the Dead Sea, not on the property. They completely lied.
Wow.
So they took some old footage, put it in, and they portrayed it as being the actual red heifer altar. So this is where discernment is we have to be so discerning today because there's so much misinformation. And the fact that, well, it's not surprising that CBS would lie, but they did it to stoke the flames of feelings against Israel.
Well, it's the importance of what you're doing, because this book is really fantastic, and we're going to talk in just a little bit about the questions you ask at the end of the book, which I think are very important. But you can trust Mondo and what he's saying, because again, you're talking to Byron Stinson, you're talking to the people that are in the know over there. This isn't secondhand. So in Revelation 11, John says, "I was handed a rod and told to measure the temple, but not the outer court, because it had been given to the Gentiles to trample underfoot for 42 months. So there's going to be a rebuilt temple on the Temple Mount. And we know 2 Thessalonians 2 tells us that the Antichrist sits as God in the temple of God, proclaiming that he is God. So it's going to be rebuilt, but they cannot rebuild it without the ashes of the red heifer. Okay, and so this is the 10th red heifer, is that correct?
Yeah, according to Maimonides, yeah.
Talk about the significance of that.
Yeah, so Maimonides was a very well-known rabbi in basically, the 10th, 11th century. And he wrote a whole commentary called the Mishnah Torah. And he's writing about the longing to when the temple comes back, this is how we will accomplish it. This is what we need to do. And he was trying to put in writing some of the Jewish traditions that could be lost. And so he has a chapter in there on the red heifer, and he talks in there that from his understanding, up until the time of the second temple, during basically Jesus' day, there had been 9 red heifers slaughtered in history. And so what he said was that when the 10th one comes, it will be offered up or officiated over by the Messiah himself.
Wow.
Okay. Now, what the Jews have done, the traditional or today's rabbinic Jews, they're like, well, we don't want to commit to that because then that would leave them not being able to do anything. What they said was, they said that when the 10th heifer arrives and is offered in a ceremony, it's going to reveal that it's the Messiah, the Messianic era has arrived. Right. Now, we would agree with that. Yeah. That I think what we're seeing is the Messianic era of Jesus returning and having the kingdom is truly here. So Maimonides said what he said, and again, they take all these things. In addition to the Bible, they have their Jewish traditions, and so that's why there's all these other extra requirements, hair follicles and different things like that, which I get into.
It's very stringent that it can have, white hairs or, it's a miracle that you have 3 that are kosher right now. And so how long have they been looking for the red heifer? Because this is 2024, where they now have kosher red heifers that they could actually sacrifice today if they wanted to. Okay, how long have they been looking?
They've thought about it for a long time, but the modern movement began really in the 80s into early in the 90s, going to Mississippi. This isn't the first time rabbis have come to America. Right. Yeah. They came to Mississippi. Clyde Lott, in Rabbi Richmond's book, he's got a picture of him, of the heifer that was at least a candidate. It later became disqualified. So since the late 80s, early 90s, this has been on the radar. And of course, there's been, again, I've been watching since 93, and there was one that shows up and then it disappears, another one that shows up and then it disappears. But this is different in that what people might not know is that in addition to these 5, there's 15 more, 18 more on the ranch that are all considered at least possibilities that they're watching. So the ranchers here in Texas, up in Rockwall and other places, this is their goal. They are breeding. Ty Davenport, he's well known for his ranch. He says, I'm doing this specifically to raise Red Angus for the temple.
Hope you enjoyed today's show. Listen to see the entire Tipping Point show. Go to endtimes.com. Become a subscriber for $7 a month. Love to have you as a subscriber, but I hope that this information has been helpful to you. And listen, you can give to us on endtimes.com. You can go and you can give a donation one time. You can give a recurring donation. We need your support to keep this ministry going and to reach out to as many people as we possibly can. First of all, to lead them to Jesus Christ, but also to give comfort and encouragement to people in the very difficult times that we're living in. People need biblical truth and Bible prophecy to help them to contextualize the things that are happening in the world. The world's crazy right now, but the Bible tells us exactly what to expect, and that's comforting because Jesus Christ is coming. Thank you for joining me today. Go to endtimes.com to become a subscriber and also to give to the ministry. God bless you.
Thank you.